September 1963, the California desert lay silent under a sky thick with stars. At Fort Irwin, where the Mojave stretched endlessly in all directions, the night air carried the scent of oil and steel. Inside Maintenance Bay 7, a single work lamp cast long shadows across the concrete floor. The sound of a wrench against metal echoed through the empty space. Captain Jacob Mitchell sat alone in the turret of an M60 Patton tank. 45 years old, gray touching his temples, hands scarred from 2 decades of military service. He held a photograph in those hands now, the edges worn soft from too much handling. A young man in a fresh lieutenant's uniform smiled back at him from the picture. Second Lieutenant David Mitchell, 22 years old, his son, dead 3 months. The bourbon bottle sat on the tank commander's seat beside him, half empty or half full, depending on how a man chose to see things. Jacob had stopped caring about perspective somewhere around the third glass. The amber liquid caught the lamplight, throwing golden reflections across the turret interior. The same interior where he had trained David, where he had taught his boy everything he knew about commanding steel and fire and men, where he had prepared his son to die. The thought came unbidden, as it did every night, every morning, every moment when his mind wasn't occupied with something else. David hadn't died in combat. There was no glory in it, no enemy to blame, just a training accident, they said, a mechanical failure during a routine exercise. The M48 had rolled during a sharp turn. David, riding in the commander's position just as his father had taught him, was crushed when the 50-ton machine flipped. Mechanical failure. The words tasted like ash in Jacob's mouth. He took another drink. The bourbon burned going down, but it was a cleaner burn than grief, cleaner than the question that haunted him through every sleepless night. Had he pushed too hard? Had he demanded too much? David had always wanted to follow in his footsteps. Tank commander, just like his old man, and Jacob had been proud. God help him, he had been so proud. Now pride felt like poison. The photograph slipped from his fingers, falling onto the metal deck. Jacob closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he saw the funeral. Arlington National Cemetery. The flag folded into a triangle, the rifle salute cracking across the green hills. His wife had died 10 years before. Cancer. Now David was buried beside her. Jacob had stood between their graves after the ceremony, feeling the weight of being the last one standing. The last Mitchell, the survivor. He opened the manila envelope that sat beside the bourbon bottle. His retirement papers, already filled out, already signed. He just needed to submit them. Walk away. 45 years old was young enough to start over, old enough to know he wouldn't. You didn't start over when half your soul was buried in Virginia dirt. The work lamp flickered. Jacob picked up the photograph again, smoothing it gently against his knee. David's smile was his mother's smile. Bright, uncomplicated, full of faith that the world made sense, that doing the right thing mattered, that honor was more than just a word they carved on gravestones. A fool's faith, Jacob thought, but he had believed it once too. The sound of boots on concrete made him look up. Master Sergeant Eddie Torres walked into the maintenance bay, moving with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent 20 years keeping tanks running. 35 years old, Mexican-American, with laugh lines around his eyes even when he wasn't smiling. Torres had served under Jacob in Korea, had pulled him out of a burning tank after they'd taken a direct hit from Chinese artillery, had been David's friend as much as his NCO. Torres stopped at the base of the tank, looking up. He didn't say anything about the bourbon, didn't ask what Jacob was doing here at 2 in the morning. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, waiting. Finally, Jacob spoke. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Can't sleep, Eddie. Could ask you the same thing, Captain. Jacob took another drink. I'm celebrating. What are we celebrating, sir? My retirement. Torres was quiet for a moment. Then he climbed up onto the tank, settling onto the turret beside Jacob. He looked at the envelope, at the photograph, at the bourbon. David wouldn't want this, Torres said softly. David's dead. The words came out flat, factual. What David wants doesn't matter anymore. That's the bourbon talking. The bourbon's the only honest thing in my life right now. Jacob set the bottle down hard enough that it rang against the metal. I trained him, Eddie. I taught him every move, every protocol, every goddamn thing I knew about commanding a tank. And it killed him. It was an accident, sir. Was it? Torres frowned. What do you mean? Jacob shook his head. The doubt had been eating at him for 3 months, But he'd never said it out loud. Not to anyone. Mechanical failure. A machine that had been serviced 2 days before suddenly throwing a track on a routine turn. David, who could handle an M48 in his sleep, somehow losing control. It didn't add up. But what was the alternative? That someone had sabotaged his son? That was paranoia. Grief talking. The bourbon talking. Nothing, Jacob said. Forget it. Torres didn't look convinced, but he let it go. Instead, he pulled out a cigarette, offering one to Jacob. They smoked in silence for a while, two old soldiers sitting on top of a tank in the middle of the night, remembering better days. You really going to retire? Torres asked finally. Nothing left to stay for. You've got your men, you've got your tanks, you've got 20 years of knowledge that the Army needs. The Army doesn't need me, Eddie. The Army's got plenty of tank commanders. Younger, faster, not carrying around a son's coffin on their backs. Torres took a long drag on his cigarette. You think walking away is going to make it hurt less? I think staying here is going to kill me. Then maybe it's good you're leaving. Jacob looked at him sharply. Torres met his gaze without flinching. I mean it, sir. If you're done, you're done. No shame in that. David would understand. Don't, Jacob's voice went hard. Don't tell me what David would understand. You don't know. I knew him pretty well, Captain. He talked about you all the time, about how proud he was, how much he wanted to be like you. Not because you pushed him, because you showed him what it meant to be a man worth following. Something cracked in Jacob's chest. He looked away, blinking hard. I got him killed, Eddie. No, sir. You taught him to serve. There's a difference. Before Jacob could respond, headlights swept across the maintenance bay. A Jeep pulled up outside, moving fast. The engine cut off. Car doors opened and closed with military precision. Jacob and Torres exchanged glances. Nobody came to the tank maintenance bay at 0200 hours unless something was seriously wrong. Two figures walked into the light, both in uniform. One was a full colonel Jacob didn't recognize. The other was a face from the past, a face Jacob had hoped never to see again. Colonel Martin Graves, Central Intelligence Agency, 50 years old, with the kind of face that revealed nothing, gray eyes like chips of flint, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile sometime around 1945. He wore his uniform like armor, every crease perfect, every ribbon precisely placed. Graves had been in intelligence since the OSS days during World War II. He was the kind of man who sent other men to die and slept soundly afterward. He was also the man who had ordered the training exercise that killed David. Jacob felt his hands curl into fists. Torres must have seen it because he put a hand on Jacob's shoulder. A silent warning. Not here, not now. Grace stopped at the base of the tank, looking up. His expression didn't change when he saw the bourbon bottle. Captain Mitchell. Jacob didn't salute, didn't move, just stared down at the man who haunted his nightmares. Colonel Graves, I need you to come with me. I'm off duty. This isn't a request, Captain. Jacob felt the anger rising in his chest, hot and bitter. He climbed down from the tank slowly, deliberately, until he was standing face to face with Graves. He was 3 inches taller than the colonel. It felt good to look down at him. My son died in one of your training exercises. I know. That's all you've got to say? You know? Graves' expression didn't flicker. I understand that you're grieving, Captain, but I need you to set that aside for the next few minutes. Lives are at stake. Lives are always at stake with you, aren't they, Graves? Other people's lives, other people's sons. Captain Mitchell, the other officer stepped forward, full colonel's eagles on his shoulders. I'm Colonel Robert Hayes, Fort Irwin Command. Colonel Graves is here on direct orders from the CI. You will accord him the respect his position demands, or you will be placed under arrest. Is that clear? Jacob held Graves' gaze for another long moment. Then he nodded once. Crystal clear, sir? Good. Hayes looked relieved. Colonel Graves, the briefing room is this way. They walked through the dark base, 4 men moving in silence. The night air was cool against Jacob's face, clearing some of the bourbon fog from his head. He glanced at Torres, who walked beside him with that same easy confidence. Whatever was happening, it was big enough to pull a CIA colonel out to a tank base in the middle of the night, big enough to drag a drunk captain out of his grief. The briefing room was small and sterile. White walls, a table with 6 chairs, a projector set up aimed at a pull-down screen. Hayes closed the door behind them and locked it. Graves moved to the projector without preamble. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level, Graves said. Nothing leaves this room without my express authorization. Understood? Jacob and Torres nodded. Graves clicked a button. An image appeared on the screen. A military photograph. Four-star general's uniform. Distinguished features. Iron gray hair. Jacob felt his breath catch. Lieutenant General Robert Castellano. 72 hours ago, Graves said. General Castellano was inspecting a classified missile defense facility in Nevada. At 1400 hours, his convoy was ambushed. 6 soldiers were killed. The general was taken. Jacob stared at the photograph. His mind was reeling. Robert Castellano, Iron Duke Castellano, the man who had saved his life in Italy during World War II, the man who had pulled him from a burning Sherman tank while German artillery pounded the hillside, the man who had paid for Jacob's education at West Point after the war, who had stood as best man at his wedding, who had held David when he was born, the man Jacob thought of as a second father. Taken, Jacob repeated slowly. By who? We don't know yet, but we have intelligence suggesting it's an inside job. Elements within our own military. Traitors. Torres said the word like it tasted bad. Yes. Graves clicked to another image. An aerial photograph of a mountain facility. Snow-covered peaks. Dense forest. A cluster of buildings at the summit. We believe he's being held here. Camp Granite. It's an old training facility in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Decommissioned in 1958. Perfect location for a covert detention. Why take him? Jacob asked. His voice was steadier now, focused. What do they want? General Castellano is the architect of our NORAD missile defense system. He has access to codes, protocols, launch sequences, information that would be invaluable to the Soviet Union. Jesus Christ. They're going to torture him, Graves continued, extract what they need, then either kill him or hand him over to the KGB. We have 48 hours before they move him, maybe less. Jacob looked at the aerial photograph. The facility sat at the top of a mountain, surrounded by cliffs on 3 sides. A single access road snaked up from the valley below. It was a fortress. You can't go in by air, Jacob said. They'll hear the helicopters coming from miles away. Correct. Infantry won't work either. That road is a death trap. They'll see you coming and either kill the general or evacuate him before you're halfway up. Also correct. Graves looked at him steadily, which is why we need tanks. Jacob felt Torres tense beside him. He looked at Graves like the man had lost his mind. Tanks? You want to drive tanks up a mountain? 3 M60 Patton tanks disguised as a routine training exercise. You'll move through the Mojave, cross into Nevada, and approach Camp Granite from the southern access route. The terrain is rough, but it's been done before. In Korea, you led a tank column through worse. Jacob's mind was racing. It was insane. Tanks weren't made for mountain climbing. The M60 Patton weighed 48 tons. The slopes would be brutal. The fuel consumption alone would be staggering. But Graves was right about one thing. If anyone could do it, he could. Why me? Jacob asked. Because you're the best tank commander we have. Because you know General Castellano personally. And because you're already planning to retire, which makes you expendable. The word hung in the air like a slap. Expendable. You son of a bitch, Jacob said softly. Graves didn't flinch. I'm not here to be your friend, Captain. I'm here to save a 4-star general who happens to be the only man standing between us and nuclear annihilation. Now, are you in or are you out? Jacob looked at the photograph of Castellano again. Remembered Italy. Remembered the old man's steady hands pulling him from the flames. Remembered him at David's christening, at David's graduation, at David's funeral. The man who had been there through everything, who had never asked for anything in return. Until now. I'm in, Jacob said, but I have conditions. Name them. I pick my crew. No CIA observers. No oversight. When we're in the field, I'm in command. You stay the hell out of my way. Graves considered this, then nodded. Agreed, but understand this, Captain. If you fail, General Castellano dies. And if he dies, he takes America's nuclear defense secrets with him. We'll be blind, vulnerable. The Russians will know it, and they will act. No pressure then, Torres muttered. Graves ignored him. He pulled out a file folder, setting it on the table. Inside is everything we know about Camp Granite. Guard numbers, patrol patterns, facility layout. Study it, memorize it. You leave at 0600 hours. That gives you 4 hours. Jacob picked up the folder. It was heavy in his hands. Who else knows about this? You, me, Colonel Hayes, and 3 men in Washington. No one else. This is completely off the books. If something goes wrong, the Army will disavow all knowledge of this operation. You'll be painted as a rogue commander who stole military equipment and got his men killed. Of course we will, Jacob said bitterly. Welcome to intelligence work, Captain. Graves moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. You should know, there's a strong possibility that whoever took General Castellano has operatives inside Fort Irwin. Watch your back. Trust no one. He left. Colonel Hayes followed him out, leaving Jacob and Torres alone in the briefing room. Torres whistled low. This is insane. Completely. We're really going to drive tanks up a mountain to rescue a general from our own soldiers? Looks that way. Torres was quiet for a moment. Then he grinned. Hell of a way to retire, Captain. Jacob looked at the folder in his hands, at the photograph of Castellano, at the impossible mission Graves had just dropped in his lap. 3 hours ago, he'd been ready to walk away, ready to let the grief drown him, ready to give up. Now he had something else. Purpose, direction, a debt to repay. He thought of David, of the way his son had smiled when he got his tank commander assignment, of the pride in his voice when he called home to share the news. Dad, I did it. I'm going to command steel, just like you. Maybe Torres was right. Maybe David would understand. Maybe doing this one last thing, saving the man who had saved Jacob's life, would mean something, would honor something, would prove that the Mitchell name still stood for something more than grief and bourbon and retirement papers gathering dust. All right, Jacob said, let's go pick a crew. They spent the next 3 hours pulling together a team, 12 men total, spread across 3 tanks. Jacob chose carefully. Men he trusted, men who had served with him before, men who wouldn't ask too many questions when the mission went sideways, and missions like this always went sideways. Master Sergeant Eddie Torres would be his gunner and second in command. No question there. Eddie had been with him through Korea, through a dozen combat engagements, through the long peacetime years that followed. If Jacob was going into hell, Eddie was the only man he wanted covering his back. Staff Sergeant Raymond Johnson signed on as primary gunner for the second tank. 28 years old, African-American, quiet to the point of unsettling. But he could put a 90mm shell through a window at 2,000 yards. Jacob had seen him do it in Korea. Johnson didn't talk much, but when he did, men listened. The third tank would be commanded by First Lieutenant Marcus Webb, 32 years old, West Point graduate, ambitious, hungry for promotion. Jacob didn't particularly like Webb, but the man knew his business, and more importantly, he was single. No wife, no kids. If this mission went bad, at least there wouldn't be more widows to notify. The rest of the crew filled in around them. Tank drivers, loaders, radio operators, mechanics. The essential men who kept the machines running when everything went to hell. Jacob briefed them in groups of 3, keeping the information compartmentalized, just in case Graves was right about having a traitor on base. By Euro 5:30 hours, they were ready. 3 M48 Patton tanks sat in the motor pool, painted in desert camouflage, marked with training exercise designations. To anyone watching, they were just another convoy heading out for maneuvers. Nothing special, nothing worth reporting. Jacob stood beside his command tank, designated Ironsides, and watched his crew run final checks. The desert dawn was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of orange and purple, beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were. He thought of his retirement papers, still sitting unsigned on his bunk, thought of the bourbon bottle in the maintenance bay, thought of David's grave back in Virginia. Then he thought of Robert Castellano, sitting in some cell in the mountains, waiting, hoping, believing that someone would come. Torres climbed up beside him. Ready, Captain? Jacob looked at the mountains in the distance. The Sierra Nevada. Somewhere up there, in the snow, in the rocks, in the thin air, was the man who had given him a second chance at life, who had believed in him when no one else did, who had been there for every moment that mattered. Now it was Jacob's turn. Let's bring him home, Eddie. Hoo-ah, sir. The tanks rumbled to life, diesel engines growling in the pre-dawn stillness. Jacob settled into the commander's position, feeling the familiar weight of the headset over his ears, the solid presence of steel all around him. This was his world. This was what he knew. Fire and metal, and the men who rode them into battle. All units, this is Ironsides, Jacob said into the radio. We are moving out. Maintain radio silence except for emergencies. Formation Delta, 50-meter spacing, move out. The 3 tanks lurched forward, treads biting into the sand. Fort Irwin fell away behind them as they headed west. toward the mountains, toward the mission, toward whatever waited at the end of this impossible road. The Mojave Desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving. The temperature was already climbing, promising another scorching day. But Jacob barely noticed. His mind was far ahead, running scenarios, calculating angles, preparing for the 100 things that could go wrong. They drove through the morning, maintaining the slow, steady pace of a training exercise, past dry lake beds and Joshua trees and rocks that looked like they'd been there since the world was new. The mountains grew larger on the horizon, blue shadows becoming solid peaks, snow visible on the highest ridges. At 1100 hours, they stopped to refuel. The crews worked quickly, efficiently, saying little. Jacob stood apart, studying the terrain ahead through binoculars. The Sierra Nevada was beautiful and deadly. The access road Graves had shown him snaked through a valley between two peaks, climbing steadily toward Camp Granite. It would take hours to navigate, hours when they'd be exposed, vulnerable. "Captain," Lieutenant Webb approached, carrying a canteen. "The men are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "About the mission, about where we're really going. This doesn't feel like a standard training exercise." Jacob lowered the binoculars. Webb was looking at him with those sharp, calculating eyes, ambitious eyes, the kind that saw angles and opportunities where other men saw only orders. "The men don't need to know anything except their jobs," Jacob said. "We're following orders. That's all." "Orders from who? Colonel Graves? The CIA?" Webb's voice dropped lower. "Sir, with respect, something about this doesn't add up. We're heading toward Nevada with no support, no air cover, no extraction plan that I can see. If I didn't know better, I'd say we were being set up." Jacob studied the younger officer. Was this legitimate concern? Or was this the traitor Graves had warned about? "Trust no one," the colonel had said. "Good advice. Hard to follow." "Lieutenant Webb, you volunteered for this mission. If you're having second thoughts, now's the time to say so." Webb held his gaze for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No second thoughts, sir. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. We're on the page I put us on. That's all you need to know." Webb nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He walked back to his tank. Jacob watched him go, feeling the prickle of unease at the base of his skull. Something about that conversation felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Torres came up beside him, following his gaze. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Torres asked quietly. "If you're thinking Webb's going to be a problem, then yes. Want me to keep an eye on him? Keep both eyes on him. And Eddie? If he does anything at all that looks wrong, you tell me immediately." "Roger that, Captain." They mounted up again, pushing deeper into the desert. The sun climbed higher. The heat became oppressive inside the tanks, the metal shells turning into ovens. But the crews endured. This was what they trained for. This was what separated soldiers from everyone else. The ability to keep going when your body screamed to stop. When every rational thought said, turn back. When the mission was everything and comfort meant nothing. At 1600 hours, they reached the town of Lone Pine, a small settlement at the base of the Sierra Nevada. Population maybe 2,000. Gas stations and diners, and people who asked no questions about military convoys passing through. Jacob ordered a halt for fuel and food. The crews scattered to the diner while the tanks were serviced. Jacob remained with the vehicles, checking fuel lines and track tension. The work was meditative, familiar. It gave his hands something to do while his mind chewed on the mission ahead. A jeep pulled into the gas station. 4 soldiers inside, all wearing the insignia of the 9th Infantry Division. The driver, a captain, climbed out and approached Jacob. "Afternoon," the captain said. "You boys running exercises?" "That's right," Jacob replied, not looking up from his work. "Funny, I didn't see any training schedules for this sector." Jacob straightened slowly. The captain was young, maybe 30, with the kind of clean-cut features that marked him as West Point. Behind him, the other 3 soldiers were watching closely. Too closely. "You in the habit of checking training schedules for other units?" Jacob asked mildly. "Just curious. We've had some unusual activity in the area lately. Command likes us to keep tabs." "Well, you can tell your command that the 3rd Armored is running a routine logistics exercise. If they want more details, they can call Fort Irwin." The captain smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if I see your orders?" This was it, the moment Graves had warned about. If these men were part of the conspiracy, they'd know there were no official orders. They'd know this was off the books. and they'd either try to stop him or report his position to whoever was holding Castellano. Jacob pulled out the forged documents Graves had provided. They looked perfect. Official seals, proper signatures, the kind of paperwork that would fool anyone who wasn't actively looking for inconsistencies. The captain studied them for a long moment. Jacob's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Torres had noticed the tension and was moving casually closer, his own hand near his pistol. Finally, the captain handed the papers back. "Looks good. Sorry to bother you, sir, just doing my job." "No problem, Captain." The jeep pulled away. Jacob watched it go, not relaxing until it disappeared around a bend in the road. "That was close," Torres said. "Too close. They know we're here now. We need to move fast." They gathered the crews and mounted up within 15 minutes. The tanks rolled out of Lone Pine, heading north, toward the mountains that now loomed directly ahead. The road began to climb almost immediately, switchbacks cutting through pine forests that grew thicker as they gained elevation. By 1800 hours, they were at 4,000 feet. The air was cooler here, sharp with the scent of pine and stone. The tanks labored on the steep grades, engines roaring, treads churning. This was the kind of terrain that broke machines and men alike. But they pushed on. At 1900 hours, the sun began to set behind them, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful and terrible. Jacob ordered night running lights only. They were getting close to Camp Granite now. Close enough that sound would carry. Close enough that any mistake could be fatal. The road narrowed. Trees pressed close on either side, branches scraping against the tanks like skeletal fingers. The temperature dropped as full darkness fell. Jacob could see his breath now, white vapor in the dim light from the instruments. They were at 8,000 feet, maybe 9. The air was thin. Every breath felt like it wasn't quite enough. At 2100 hours, they reached a narrow pass called Dead Man's Cut. The road squeezed between two cliff faces, barely wide enough for a tank to pass through. Jacob studied the terrain through his night vision scope. Perfect ambush country. If someone wanted to stop them, this is where they'd do it. "All units, combat spacing," Jacob ordered. "Weapons hot. Watch for movement on the ridgeline." The tanks spread out as much as the terrain allowed, 50 meters between each vehicle now. If someone hit the lead tank, the others would have room to maneuver. In theory, they entered the pass. The explosion came without warning. A massive blast ahead. Turning night into day, Jacob's tank rocked with the concussion. Through the smoke and flames, he could see the road ahead had been destroyed, cratered. A massive anti-tank mine positioned perfectly to stop their advance. "Contact front!" Jacob shouted. "All units halt!" Before the tanks could react, steel barriers dropped from the cliffs above, crashing down behind them. They were boxed in, trapped in a kill zone. Movement on the ridgelines, 24 figures, maybe more, rising from concealment. The muzzle flashes came an instant later. Heavy weapons, rockets, the distinctive whoosh of bazookas firing. "Evasive action!" Jacob screamed. "Return fire!" The night exploded into chaos. Tracer rounds arced through the darkness. The lead tank, commanded by Lieutenant Webb, took a rocket hit to the Glacier's plate. The shaped charge punched through the armor. The tank lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from the hatches. Jacob's gunner, Torres, was already swinging the turret. The 90mm main gun roared, sending a high-explosive shell into the cliff face where most of the fire was coming from. Rock and earth erupted, bodies fell, but there were too many of them, too well positioned. This was a carefully planned ambush. They'd been waiting. They'd known exactly where the tanks would be. Someone had told them. Someone had given them up. "Webb's tank is hit," Torres shouted. "I see survivors bailing out." Jacob made a split-second decision. They couldn't go forward, couldn't go back. But tanks weren't meant to just sit still and die. "All units, target the right cliff face. Concentrated fire. We're making our own exit." It was insane, trying to blast through solid rock with tank guns, but insane was better than dead. Both remaining tanks pivoted, main guns elevating. They fired simultaneously. The concussion was enormous. Stone shattered. An entire section of the cliff face gave way, creating a crude ramp of rubble leading up and out of the kill zone. "Torres, driver, get us up that ramp, now!" The tank lurched forward, treads clawing at loose rock. For a horrible moment, Jacob thought they wouldn't make it. The angle was too steep, the rubble too unstable. Then the treads caught, and they were climbing, engines screaming, smoke pouring from the exhaust. Behind them, Johnson's tank followed. Rockets continued to impact around them. One struck a tree beside Jacob's tank, filling the air with splinters and fire. But they kept climbing, kept fighting, kept moving. They reached the top of the rubble pile and burst through into clear terrain. Forest, rocky ground, but open. Escape. "Status report," Jacob demanded. "Webb's tank is destroyed," Torres said grimly. "I saw 3 men get out. Maybe 4. The rest are dead." Jacob felt the loss like a physical blow. 3 men, maybe 4, out of a crew of 4 on each tank. They just lost 7 or 8 soldiers. 7 or 8 men who trusted him to bring them home. "We can't stop," Jacob said, his voice rough. "Keep moving. We need distance." They drove hard for 30 minutes, putting miles between themselves and the ambush site. Finally, Jacob ordered a halt in a dense grove of pines. The surviving crews dismounted, checking damage, accounting for losses. The final count was brutal. Webb's entire tank crew was gone. 4 men dead. They were down to 2 tanks, 14 men total, against an enemy that knew they were coming. That had been waiting for them. Torres approached, his face grim in the darkness. "Captain, we've got a problem." "Just one?" "I found something in the wreckage we left behind." Torres held up a small device. "Radio transmitter. Military issue. This was on Webb's tank. Someone's been broadcasting our position." Jacob felt ice flood his veins. Webb. Lieutenant Marcus Webb. The ambitious young officer who'd asked too many questions. Who'd wanted to know the mission details. Who'd been positioned perfectly to feed information to the enemy. Webb was the traitor. And now Webb was behind them, captured or dead. And Jacob would never get the answers he needed. Never know who else was involved. Never know how deep the conspiracy went. "Sir," one of the remaining crew members jogged up. "We found survivors from the ambush. 3 of them. They're hurt but mobile. Bring them here." The 3 men were brought forward, all injured. Burns, shrapnel wounds, but alive. Jacob recognized them, good soldiers, men who'd done their jobs and paid the price for trusting their commander. "Where's Lieutenant Webb?" Jacob demanded. "Dead, sir," one of them said. "Took a rocket directly to the turret. Never had a chance." Jacob nodded slowly. Part of him felt relief. Webb couldn't give away any more information. But part of him felt only cold fury. The man had betrayed them, had sold them out, had gotten his own crew killed in the process. "Listen to me," Jacob said, gathering all his remaining men. "What happened tonight changes nothing. General Castellano is still up there, still waiting for us. We're still going in. But now we know. We know there's a traitor network. We know they're organized. We know they'll kill Americans to protect their secrets." He looked each man in the eye. "If anyone wants out, speak now. No judgment, no consequences. This mission just got a hell of a lot more dangerous." No one moved. No one spoke. These were soldiers. They'd signed up to face danger, and now danger was all they had left to give. "All right then," Jacob said. "We leave the damaged tank here. Rig it with explosives so the enemy can't use it. Everyone else mounts up. We've got 12 miles to go, and we're doing it on foot from here. The terrain's too rough for tanks from this point anyway." Torres pulled him aside as the men began preparing. "Captain, I need to tell you something." "What?" "Before we left Fort Irwin, I did some digging into David's accident, into the investigation report." Jacob's heart clenched. "Why?" "Because you weren't the only one who thought it didn't add up." Torres pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found this in the maintenance logs. Someone signed off on David's tank 2 days before the accident, certified it as mechanically sound." He handed the paper to Jacob. Even in the dim light, the signature was clearly visible. "Lieutenant Marcus Webb." The world seemed to stop. Jacob stared at the signature, his mind refusing to process what it meant. Webb had certified David's tank. Webb, who was now revealed as a traitor, who had been feeding information to the enemy, who had worked with the same people who took General Castellano. "Captain," Torres' voice was gentle, "I think David's death wasn't an accident. I think he discovered something about the conspiracy, about the traitors, and I think they killed him for it." Jacob looked up at the mountains ahead. Somewhere up there was Camp Granite. Somewhere up there was General Castellano. And somewhere up there were the people who had murdered his son. The grief that had been drowning him for 3 months crystallized into something else, something harder, something that burned cold and clean and absolute. Purpose. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his breast pocket, right over his heart. Then we're not just rescuing the general anymore. Jacob said quietly. We're delivering justice. Torres nodded. Hoo-ah, Captain. They moved out an hour later, leaving the wrecked tank behind as a smoking decoy. 11 men on foot, carrying only essential weapons and equipment. Moving through mountain forests in the dead of night, climbing toward a facility held by an unknown number of enemy soldiers. 11 men against impossible odds, but 11 men who now knew exactly what they were fighting for. Jacob Mitchell led them forward, one step at a time, toward the peak where his second father waited, toward the reckoning with the men who had killed his son, toward whatever end awaited them all in the snow and the stone and the thin, cold air. Behind him, Master Sergeant Eddie Torres moved like a ghost through the trees, watching his captain's back, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. No one left behind, not the general, not David's memory, not the truth. They climbed toward the stars, and the night swallowed them whole. The mountain did not forgive weakness. Jacob Mitchell learned this truth again with every step, as he had learned it in Korea 12 years before, when he was younger and the cold bit less deep into his bones. Now at 45, climbing through the Sierra Nevada at 10,000 feet with 40 pounds of equipment on his back, he felt every one of those years. Behind him, 10 men followed in single file. Master Sergeant Eddie Torres at his 6 o'clock, close enough to catch him if he stumbled, far enough to give him the dignity of leading. Then Staff Sergeant Raymond Johnson, moving with that eerie silence that made you forget he was there until his rifle spoke. The others strung out behind, breathing hard in the thin air, boots crunching on frozen ground. The forest here was old growth, pine and fir, trees that had stood when Lincoln was president. Their branches interlocked overhead, blocking most of the starlight. Jacob navigated by compass and memory, following the route Graves had mapped out. 2 more miles to Camp Granite, 2 miles that might as well have been 20. His mind kept returning to the paper in his breast pocket. Webb's signature on David's maintenance log. The proof that his son hadn't died in an accident, but had been murdered. Executed because he'd discovered something. Because he'd been too much like his father. Too honest. Too unwilling to look away when he saw something wrong. The rage that thought produced was clean and cold. It gave him strength when his legs wanted to quit. It pushed him forward when his lungs screamed for more oxygen than this altitude could provide. His son deserved justice. General Castellano deserved rescue. And the men who'd orchestrated all of this deserved to face a reckoning. Torres moved up beside him during a brief halt. The men behind them took the opportunity to drink water and check their weapons. They were 2 hours from the ambush site now. 2 hours of hard climbing through terrain that fought them at every step. Captain, Torres said quietly, you okay? Fine. That's bull, and we both know it. You haven't said 10 words since we found out about David. Jacob checked his compass, not looking at Torres. What do you want me to make, Eddie? That I'm angry? That I want to kill every son of a bitch involved in this? You already know that. I want you to remember that we've still got a mission, that 10 men are depending on you to keep your head straight. That revenge is great right up until it gets you killed. Jacob finally looked at him. Torres' face was serious in the dim light, eyes reflecting genuine concern. They'd served together long enough that Torres could read him like a topographic map, could see the dangerous edge Jacob was walking. I'm not going to get us killed, Jacob said. Didn't say you would, just reminding you that we need you focused, cold, professional, not the grieving father, not right now. Jacob nodded slowly. Torres was right. There would be time for grief later. Time for rage later. Right now, he had to be Captain Jacob Mitchell, tank commander, mission leader, the man these soldiers trusted to bring them home. Message received, Sergeant. Let's move out. They continued climbing. The grade steepened. In places, they had to use their hands, pulling themselves up over rocks and fallen logs. The temperature dropped further. Jacob could see ice forming on the trees now, glittering in what little light penetrated the canopy. At 200 hours, they reached a ridgeline and got their first clear view of Camp Granite. The facility sat in a natural bowl at the summit of the mountain, surrounded by cliffs on 3 sides. 15 structures total. Most were small barracks or storage buildings, but at the center stood a larger concrete bunker, half buried in the mountainside. That would be where they were holding Castellano. That would be the target. Jacob studied the compound through binoculars. Lights showed in several buildings. Guards patrolled the perimeter, maybe 20 that he could see. More would be inside. The intel Graves had provided suggested 40 to 50 total. against his 11. Long odds, but not impossible. Torres, Jacob said, see the bunker entrance? Southeast corner, steel door, 2 guards. I see it. That's our primary objective. We go in quiet, neutralize the guards without raising alarm, get inside, locate the general, extract him, back out the way we came. And if quiet doesn't work, then we make noise and run like hell. Torres grinned. That's what I like about you, Captain. Always got a plan B. Jacob gathered the men in close, keeping his voice low as he briefed them. They would divide into 3 teams. Torres would lead the assault team, 5 men, hitting the bunker entrance. Johnson would take 3 men as overwatch, positioning on the ridge to provide covering fire if needed. Jacob would take the remaining 2 men as a reaction force, ready to reinforce either group. Rules of engagement, Jacob said. These men are American soldiers, traitors, but still Americans. We use non-lethal force where possible. Knockout blows, restraints. But if they threaten your life or the mission, you put them down. Clear? Murmurs of acknowledgement. One more thing. We don't know how deep this conspiracy goes. We don't know who else might be compromised. When we get the general out, we trust no one except each other. No radio calls except on our encrypted channel. No contact with any other units. We are alone out here. He looked at each face, young faces mostly. Men in their 20s and 30s who'd volunteered for a mission they didn't fully understand, who were now miles from help, about to assault a fortified position held by an unknown enemy. And they were ready, every one of them. Let's bring them home, Jacob said. They moved down from the ridge at 300 hours. The descent was treacherous, loose scree that wanted to slide under their boots and announce their presence to everyone in the valley. But they moved slowly, carefully, placing each step with deliberate precision. 40 minutes to cover half a mile. At the base of the slope, they split up. Johnson took his overwatch team left, working toward a position that would give them clear lines of fire into the compound. Torres led the assault team right, circling toward the bunker entrance. Jacob held position with his 2 men, watching both groups move into place. The waiting was always the worst part. The moments before action, when your mind had nothing to do but imagine everything that could go wrong. Jacob forced himself to breathe slowly, evenly, keeping his heart rate down, keeping his hand steady. He thought of Castellano, wondered what condition the general was in after 3 days of captivity. The old man was tough, had survived German artillery and communist prisons and 40 years of military politics. But he was 60 years old. There were limits to what even the toughest man could endure. Torres' voice crackled in his earpiece. Overwatch in position. Johnson responded immediately. Assault team in position. 2 guards at the entrance, just like Captain said. Smoking cigarettes. Not very alert. Jacob keyed his mic. Stand by. He checked his watch. 03:45 hours. The darkest part of the night when human alertness was at its lowest. The guards would be tired, cold, counting the minutes until their shift ended. Perfect conditions for what came next. All teams execute. Torres moved like smoke through the darkness. Jacob watched through his binoculars as the assault team approached the bunker entrance from the blind side. The 2 guards never saw them coming. Torres and another soldier emerged from the shadows, applied sleeper holds, and dragged both guards out of sight before they could make a sound. 30 seconds. Clean. Professional. Entry secured, Torres reported. Doors locked. Electronic keypad. Jacob had expected this. Graves had provided a code, supposedly obtained through intelligence channels. Jacob relayed it to Torres, watching as the sergeant punched in the numbers. The door clicked open. We're in, Torres said, moving to locate the package. The assault team disappeared inside. Jacob held his breath, counting seconds. This was the critical moment. If there were more guards inside, if the alarm was raised, everything would go to hell immediately. 60 seconds passed, 90, 2 minutes. Then Torres' voice again, tight with urgency. We have a problem. Jacob's stomach dropped. Report. The general's not here. We've cleared 3 rooms. No sign of him. Just empty cells and old equipment. Keep searching. He has to be there. Captain, I'm telling you, this place is empty. It's like nobody's been down here in years. Jacob felt ice in his veins. Empty? That wasn't possible. The intel had been solid. Graves had been certain. Unless this was a trap. Torres, pull out. Now, get your team clear of that bunker. But before Torres could acknowledge, gunfire erupted from the compound. Not from the bunker. From the barracks buildings. Doors flew open and soldiers poured out. At least 30 of them, weapons up and firing. Johnson's voice cut through the chaos. Contact! Multiple hostiles, north and east perimeters. They were waiting for us. Jacob's mind raced. They'd walked into an ambush. Again, someone had known they were coming, had positioned forces to trap them, had used the empty bunker as bait. All teams, fall back to Rally Point Alpha, Jacob ordered. Fighting retreat. Go, go, go. The night exploded into a nightmare of muzzle flashes and tracer rounds. Torres's team burst from the bunker, running for the tree line as bullets chewed up the ground around them. Johnson's Overwatch team provided covering fire, their rifles cracking steadily, forcing the enemy to take cover. Jacob moved forward with his 2 men, adding their fire to Johnson's, creating a corridor for Torres to escape through. The enemy was pouring out of every building now, dozens of them, more than the intel had suggested. This wasn't a skeleton crew guarding one prisoner. This was a full company of soldiers. And they'd been ready. One of Torres's men went down, hit in the leg. Torres grabbed him without breaking stride, hauling the wounded soldier towards safety. Another man provided covering fire, walking backwards, his M14 shattering. Then the mortar started falling. The first round impacted 20 meters from Jacob's position. The concussion knocked him flat. His ears rang, dirt and rocks rained down. He pushed himself up, tasting blood, vision swimming. Mortars! Someone screamed. They've got mortars! The enemy had set up mortar positions on the high ground. Now they were dropping shells in a precise pattern, cutting off escape routes, herding Jacob's men into a kill zone. This wasn't just an ambush. This was a carefully orchestrated assault by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Jacob keyed his mic. All teams, scatter. Don't bunch up. Make for the forest, different routes. Rally at the emergency extraction point. The neat military operation dissolved into chaos. Men running in all directions, seeking whatever cover they could find. Mortars walking across the compound. Machine gun fire from at least 3 positions. The enemy had everything. Position, numbers, firepower. They had everything except one thing. They didn't have men who'd fought in Korea. Jacob grabbed Johnson as the staff sergeant ran past. Ray, the mortars. Can you get a position on them? Johnson was breathing hard, face streaked with dirt and blood from a shrapnel cut. But his eyes were clear, focused. Give me 2 minutes and a clear line of sight. You've got 1 minute. Torres, on me. Torres materialized from the smoke and chaos, still dragging the wounded soldier. Sir, we're not running. We're taking out those mortars. Torres looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Captain, there's 40 of them and 11 of us. 40 of them who think we're running, who think they've won. That's our advantage. Ray, find me those mortars. Johnson was already moving, scrambling up a rocky outcrop that gave him elevation. 30 seconds later, his voice came through. Got them. 2 mortar pits. Northwestern Ridge, grid coordinates Echo 75. Jacob pulled out his map, found the coordinates. The ridge was maybe 400 meters away. Steep climb, heavily defended, suicide to assault. Torres, take 6 men. Circle east. Come at those pits from the flank. Ray, you and 3 men provide covering fire from here. I'll take 1 man and go straight up the middle. Draw their attention. That's insane, Torres said. That's why it'll work. They'll focus on me. You hit them from the side. 30 seconds of surprise, that's all we need. Take out the mortars, and we've got a fighting chance. Torres stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Don't get yourself killed, Captain. David would never forgive me. Jacob felt the words hit him like a physical blow. David, his son, who'd been murdered by these same people. Who deserved justice? Who deserved a father willing to do whatever it took to make things right? Move out, Jacob said. He took Private First Class Danny Morrison with him, a kid from Iowa who'd volunteered for the mission without asking a single question. 20 years old, fresh-faced, probably had parents waiting at home for him. But he followed Jacob without hesitation as they started up the slope toward the mortar positions. Behind them, Johnson's covering fire started. 3 rifles firing in controlled bursts, forcing the enemy to keep their heads down. Jacob and Morrison used the distraction, scrambling upward over rocks and through brush. A machine gun opened up from their left. Bullets snapped past, too close. Jacob dove behind a boulder, Morrison hitting the ground beside him. Splinters of rock stung Jacob's face. The machine gun was positioned perfectly to cover the approach. They were pinned. Sir, we can't get through that, Morrison said. Jacob looked at the kid's face, saw the fear there. The kind of fear every soldier feels when they realize they might die in the next few seconds. But Morrison hadn't run, hadn't frozen. He was still there, still ready to do his job. "Give me a smoke grenade," Jacob said. Morrison pulled one from his belt, handed it over. Jacob pulled the pin, counted 3, then hurled it toward the machine gun position. White smoke billowed across the hillside. Not much concealment, but enough. "Go!" They ran through the smoke, legs pumping, lungs burning. The machine gun fired blind, tracers cutting through the white clouds, but they were through, scrambling up the last 50 meters toward the mortar pits. Torres's team hit from the flank exactly on time. Jacob heard the shooting, heard the shouts of alarm. Then he was on top of the first mortar pit, his rifle up, face to face with 3 enemy soldiers. Time seemed to slow. Jacob saw their faces, young, American, wearing the same uniform he wore. For a frozen instant, nobody moved. Then training took over. Jacob fired 3 times. Center mass. Textbook. 2 men went down. The third tried to bring up his weapon. Morrison's rifle cracked once. The soldier dropped. Torres burst into the second pit 30 meters away. More shooting. Screams, then silence. "Mortars secure," Torres called out. 4 enemy K. Jacob looked down at the 2 men he'd just killed. Both probably younger than David had been. Both somebody's son. Both traitors who'd sold out their country and murdered American soldiers. But looking at their faces, all he felt was empty. This was what it came down to. What it always came down to. Men killing men because someone higher up had decided it was necessary. He'd done this in Korea. In a dozen small actions nobody remembered or cared about. And now he was doing it again. On American soil, against American soldiers. The war had come home. "Captain," Morrison pointed down into the compound. "Movement in the main building." Jacob looked where the kid indicated. The concrete bunker they'd searched earlier. Lights were coming on inside, and figures were moving. Not soldiers, civilians. At least a dozen people in regular clothes emerging from what looked like a hidden entrance. Then one figure stepped into the light. Tall, distinguished, iron gray hair. General Robert Castellano. Jacob felt his heart lurch. "He's here, the general's here. They had him in a hidden section we missed." "Sir, look who's with him," Torres said, his voice tight. Another figure emerged beside Castellano. Military uniform, stars on his shoulders. But not a prisoner, one of the captors. Major General Harrison Blackwood. Jacob had known Harrison Blackwood for 20 years. They'd served together in Korea, had spent long nights in frozen trenches, keeping each other awake, sharing cigarettes and stories and dreams of the lives they'd build after the war. Blackwood had been at Jacob's wedding, had been one of the first to visit when David was born, had sent flowers when David died. And now he stood there at the heart of this conspiracy, holding Castellano prisoner. The betrayal hit Jacob like a physical blow. Harrison, his brother in arms, his friend, one of the few people in the world he'd trusted absolutely. "Son of a bitch," Torres whispered. "Blackwood's behind this?" Jacob couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was seeing. Harrison Blackwood, the man who'd saved his life at Chosin Reservoir, who'd pulled him from a frozen river when his tank broke through the ice, who'd carried him 3 miles to safety with a bullet in his own shoulder. That man was a traitor. Blackwood was speaking to Castellano now, gesturing at the compound, at the fires still burning from the mortar shells. Even at this distance, Jacob could read the body language. Blackwood was relaxed, confident, probably explaining to the general how his rescue attempt had just failed, how his people would die here, how resistance was futile. "Captain, what are your orders?" Torres asked. Jacob's hand drifted to the paper in his breast pocket. Webb's signature on David's maintenance logs. Webb, who'd worked for Blackwood, who'd taken orders from Blackwood, who'd killed David on Blackwood's orders. Everything snapped into focus with terrible clarity. David hadn't discovered just any conspiracy. He discovered that his father's best friend was selling military secrets to the Russians, had confronted Blackwood about it probably, had given him a chance to surrender, a chance to do the right thing. And Blackwood had murdered him for it, had made it look like an accident, had come to the funeral and stood beside Jacob, offering condolences while he knew, while he'd ordered it, while David's blood was on his hands. The rage that surged through Jacob was unlike anything he'd felt before. It was pure, absolute, a fury that burned away everything else. Fear, doubt, mercy. "Captain," Torres said again more urgently, "what do we do?" Jacob looked at his old friend, at the traitor, at the man who'd killed his son. "We're going to get the general," Jacob said quietly, "and we're going to kill every son of a bitch who stands in our way. Sir, there's still 30 of them down there, maybe more. We're down to 9 effectives. This is suicide." "Then it's suicide, but I'm not leaving without Castellano, and I'm not leaving Blackwood breathing." Jacob looked at Torres. "You don't have to come, Eddie. None of you do. This is my fight now." Torres studied his face for a long moment. Then he smiled, that easy grin that had carried them through Korea. "Been following you this long, Captain. Seems stupid to stop now. Besides, somebody's got to keep you from doing anything too heroic." One by one, the other men gathered around. Morris and Johnson, the rest of them, battered, bleeding, outnumbered, and ready. "All right," Jacob said, "here's the play. Johnson, you and 2 men stay here with the mortars. Use them. Drop shells on every building except the main bunker. Create chaos. Force them to take cover. The rest of us go straight in, fast and hard. We hit the bunker, we get the general, we punch back out before they know what happened." "And Blackwood?" Torres asked. "Leave him to me." They moved down from the ridge in a running crouch. Behind them, Johnson's captured mortars started dropping shells into the compound. The effect was immediate. Buildings exploded, men scattered seeking cover, no longer organized, just trying to survive. Jacob led his team straight toward the bunker. Halfway there, they ran into a patrol, 5 enemy soldiers caught in the open. The firefight was brief and brutal. Jacob's team had the advantage of surprise and desperation. When it was over, 4 enemy soldiers were down. The 5th ran, screaming into his radio. So much for stealth. "Double time," Jacob ordered, "before they can regroup." They reached the bunker entrance, just as more enemy soldiers came running from the barracks. Jacob threw the door open, his team piling inside. Morrison stayed at the entrance, laying down covering fire with his M14, buying them precious seconds. Inside, the bunker was different than it had been 30 minutes ago. Doors stood open that had been sealed before. Lights illuminated corridors that had been dark. And at the end of the main hallway stood Harrison Blackwood, with a pistol pointed at General Castellano's head. Jacob and Blackwood locked eyes across 30 feet of concrete corridor. "Hello, Jake," Blackwood said. His voice was calm, pleasant, like they were meeting for drinks instead of pointing guns at each other. "Should have known you'd make it this far. You always were too stubborn to quit." "Harrison," Jacob's voice was steel, "let the general go." "Can't do that, old friend. The general knows too much. Codes, names, operational details. He's worth $5 million to my Russian colleagues. I'm not walking away from that kind of money." "Money? You did this for money? What else is there, Jake? Honor? Duty? We spent 20 years bleeding for this country. What did it get us? A pension that won't cover rent and a medal nobody cares about." Blackwood's face hardened. "I decided I wanted more." Castellano spoke for the first time. His voice was rough, probably from days without water, but still strong. "Jacob, don't let him take you alive. He's got people everywhere. In the Army, CIA, FBI. If you're captured, you're dead." "Shut up, Robert," Blackwood snapped, pressing the gun harder against the general's temple. Jacob kept his rifle trained on Blackwood's center mass, but he couldn't fire. Not with the general right there. Not with Blackwood's finger on the trigger. One wrong move and Castellano died. "You killed David," Jacob said. Blackwood's expression didn't change. "Yes." "Why?" "Because your son was too much like you, honorable, inflexible. He found evidence of my arrangement with the Russians, confronted me, gave me an ultimatum, turn myself in or he'd report me." Blackwood shook his head. "I couldn't allow that. I'm sorry, Jake, I truly am. David was a good kid, but he left me no choice." The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Jacob felt something break inside his chest. The last small hope that it had been a mistake, an accident, anything but this cold, calculated murder. "He was your godson," Jacob said, his voice cracking. "You held him when he was baptized. You taught him to shoot, to drive. You were his uncle. And that made it harder, believe me. But business is business, you understand that?" "No, I don't understand murdering children." "He wasn't a child. He was a soldier who made a poor tactical decision. He should have kept his mouth shut and walked away. Instead, he chose honor. Honor got him killed." Blackwood's smile was sad. "Same mistake you're making right now." "I'm not making a mistake. I'm keeping a promise." "What promise?" "The promise I made at my son's grave. that the men who killed him would pay. Jacob's finger tightened on the trigger. But before he could fire, Castellano moved. The general was 60 years old, had been held captive for 3 days, was probably dehydrated and exhausted. But he was still a soldier, still a man who'd survived 40 years of combat and politics through quick thinking and decisive action. He slammed his elbow back into Blackwood's stomach, not enough to seriously hurt him, but enough to disrupt his aim. The pistol fired, the shot going wide, punching into the concrete wall. Jacob didn't hesitate. He fired 3 times, center mass. Blackwood went down hard, blood spreading across his uniform. The pistol clattered from his hand. He lay there gasping, looking up at Jacob with something like surprise in his eyes. Jacob walked forward slowly, rifle still trained on his old friend. Torres and the others secured the corridor, checking rooms, making sure no one else was waiting in ambush. Blackwood coughed blood. "Jake, wait!" Jacob stood over him, looking down. 20 years of friendship, 20 years of brotherhood, ended here, in a concrete bunker with 3 bullets from an M14. "Did you mean it?" Blackwood wheezed. "About not being able to forgive me?" "Yes, fair enough." Another cough, more blood. "For what it's worth, I am sorry about David. He deserved better. He deserved a godfather who wasn't a murdering traitor." Blackwood tried to laugh, but it came out as a gurgle. "Guess we all deserve things we don't get." His eyes started to lose focus. "Jake, one thing. The Russians. They know about this facility, know about the operation. They'll be coming. You need to get out. Take Robert. Get him somewhere safe. They'll kill you all if they catch you here." "Who else is involved? How many more traitors are there?" "Too many. FBI, CIA, Pentagon. It goes deeper than you think." Blackwood's breathing was getting shallower. "Sorry, old friend. Sorry it ended like this." "So am I, Harrison, so am I." Blackwood's eyes closed. His chest stopped moving. Major General Harrison Blackwood, war hero and traitor, was dead. Jacob felt nothing, no satisfaction, no closure, just empty. Torres appeared at his shoulder. "Captain, we need to move. Morrison's reporting at least 20 hostiles regrouping outside, and I'm hearing helicopter rotors in the distance." Jacob nodded. He turned to Castellano, who was leaning against the wall, looking shaken but intact. "General, can you walk?" "I can run if I have to, son." Castellano's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Jacob, I'm sorry. About David. About all of this. If I'd known." "Not your fault, sir. Let's get you out of here." They moved back toward the entrance. Morrison was still there, surrounded by empty brass casings, his rifle hot from sustained firing. Outside, the compound was chaos. Buildings burning, enemy soldiers scattered. Johnson's mortar fire had done exactly what it was supposed to do. "Johnson, cease fire!" Jacob ordered into his radio. "We're coming out." They burst from the bunker entrance into the open air. The enemy was starting to regroup now, officers shouting orders, soldiers taking position. But Jacob's team had momentum. They ran for the tree line, Morrison and Torres providing covering fire, the rest half-carrying General Castellano. Bullets snapped past. A mortar round landed close enough to knock Jacob flat. But he got up, kept moving, kept his people moving. Because that's what you did. You kept going until you reached safety, or you died trying. They made the forest with all 9 men and the general intact. Behind them, the enemy was in pursuit, but disorganized, confused. They'd expected to trap and kill a small raiding party. Instead, they'd lost their commander, their prisoner, and control of the situation. Jacob pushed his team hard, putting distance between them and the compound. They ran through the forest, stumbling over roots and rocks, lungs burning, legs screaming. But they ran. After 30 minutes, Jacob called a halt in a dense thicket. The men collapsed, gasping for air. General Castellano sat with his back against a tree, looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. But he was alive. That was what mattered. Torres checked casualties. Everyone had minor wounds, cuts, bruises, burns from the mortar fire, but nobody was seriously hurt. They'd done the impossible, gone into a heavily defended facility, rescued their target, and escaped with minimal losses. It should have felt like victory. Jacob sat apart from the others, his rifle across his knees, staring back toward Camp Granite. Smoke rose from the compound, black against the dawn sky. Somewhere in that smoke was Harrison Blackwood's body, his friend, his betrayer, the man who'd killed his son. He waited to feel something, relief, satisfaction, closure. But there was only emptiness. Castellano moved over to sit beside him. For a while, neither man spoke. Finally, the general said, "Jacob, there's something you need to know." "Sir?" "This whole thing, the kidnapping, the conspiracy, I've known about it for 6 months." Jacob looked at him sharply. "What?" "CIA discovered we had a high-level mole selling secrets to the Russians. Someone with access to our most sensitive programs. We couldn't figure out who. So I volunteered to be bait. Let them kidnap me, draw out the traitor." The words hit Jacob like a hammer. "You mean all of this was planned? Not the specifics, not the casualties, but yes, the basic operation. I was supposed to be taken. You were supposed to be sent in to rescue me. And in the process, we'd identify and eliminate the mole network. Did you know about David?" Castellano's face crumpled. "No, God, no, Jacob. I didn't know Blackwood had killed your son. If I'd known, I never would have let you anywhere near this mission. You have to believe that." Jacob looked away. His hands were shaking. "So my son died to protect your operation. Your bait. Your trap. David died because Harrison Blackwood was a murderer and a traitor. Not because of anything I did. Not because of anything you did. He died because he was a good man in a world full of evil. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, nothing's going to make you feel better, son. I know. I've lost people too. But I need you to understand. This conspiracy is bigger than Blackwood. Bigger than Camp Granite. There are dozens of traitors in our military, in our government, selling secrets, compromising operations, getting soldiers killed. And now, thanks to what you did tonight, we know who they are." "How?" "Because before they took me, I made sure every interaction was recorded, every conversation, every meeting. I've been gathering evidence for 6 months. Names, dates, bank accounts. It's all documented, all hidden where the traitors can't reach it. And now that Blackwood's dead, now that his network is exposed, we can roll them all up, every last one." Jacob absorbed this. So David's death wasn't for nothing. No, his death mattered. It exposed Blackwood. It led to this moment. It's going to help us save countless other lives. Castellano put his hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Your son was a hero, Jacob. He died protecting his country from enemies within. That means something." Jacob wanted to believe it, wanted to think that David's death had purpose, meaning, that it wasn't just random violence and betrayal, but sitting here in the forest, covered in other men's blood, watching the sun rise on a day his son would never see, it was hard to find comfort in purpose. Torres came over. "Captain, we've got movement on our back trail. The enemy's still hunting us. We need to move." Jacob stood slowly. His body ached. His soul ached. But Torres was right. The mission wasn't over. They still had to get everyone out alive. Still had to deliver Castellano to safety. Still had to finish what they'd started. "All right," he said. "We head west. There's an old logging road 15 miles from here. If we can reach it, I can call for extraction." 15 miles, Morrison said weakly. "Sir, some of us are barely standing." "Then we'll carry each other. That's what soldiers do. Nobody gets left behind." They moved out, heading deeper into the wilderness, away from Camp Granite and the men hunting them. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Birds sang in the trees, oblivious to the violence of the night before. Jacob walked point, leading them home. Behind him, 9 soldiers and 1 general followed, trusting him, counting on him, believing he could deliver them to safety. He would, whatever it took, because they'd done the impossible once already tonight. They'd stormed a fortress. They'd rescued their target. They'd exposed a traitor network that threatened the entire country. And they'd done it with courage and skill and the kind of stubborn determination that defined the American soldier. David would have been proud. That thought sustained Jacob as they marched through the mountains. David would have been proud of the mission, of the men, of his father's refusal to quit even when everything seemed lost. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all the purpose he needed. The forest swallowed them whole, and the mountain kept their secrets. And somewhere ahead lay safety and answers and a reckoning for all the men who'd thought they could betray their country without consequence. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today they just had to survive. One step at a time, 1 mile at a time, until they reached the other side. The mountains tested them with every mile. 15 miles through the Sierra Nevada wilderness with a 60-year-old general who'd been starved for 3 days and 9 soldiers running on adrenaline and willpower. Jacob Mitchell pushed them hard because the alternative was death. Behind them, somewhere in the forest, enemy forces hunted them with the kind of determination that came from knowing their entire conspiracy was collapsing. They'd been walking for 6 hours when Torres collapsed. One moment, the master sergeant was moving steady at Jacob's 6 o'clock. The next, he was on his knees, retching into the pine needles. Jacob called a halt immediately, the whole column stopping dead. Eddie, Jacob knelt beside him. Talk to me. Torres tried to wave him off. I'm fine, just need a minute. But he wasn't fine. None of them were. They'd been up for 36 hours straight. They'd climbed a mountain, fought 2 pitched battles, lost friends, killed enemies. Now they were running on empty tanks, asking bodies to perform miracles when they had nothing left to give. Jacob looked at the faces around him. Morrison's eyes were glassy with exhaustion. Johnson was favoring his left leg from a wound he hadn't mentioned. The others weren't much better. Even General Castellano, tough as boot leather, was barely keeping pace. We rest here, Jacob decided. 30 minutes, eat something, drink water, then we move again. Captain, the enemy, one of the men started, will catch us whether we rest or not if we're too tired to fight. 30 minutes. Set a perimeter. 2-man watch rotation. The men scattered to defensive positions. Jacob helped Torres to a fallen log, made sure he drank water. The sergeant's hands were shaking as he lifted the canteen. Been a hell of a night, sir, Torres said quietly. That's one way to put it. You okay after, Blackwood? Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Was he okay? He just killed his best friend. Had watched Harrison Blackwood bleed out on a concrete floor after 20 years of brotherhood. Had learned that everything he'd believed about honor and loyalty was a lie. No, Jacob said simply. I'm not okay, but I'm still standing. That's something. Torres nodded. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Blackwood made his choice. He killed David. He deserved what he got. Doesn't make it hurt less. No, it never does. General Castellano moved over to join them. Despite everything, the old man carried himself with dignity. Back straight, eyes clear. The bearing of a soldier who'd commanded men through worse than this. Captain Mitchell, we need to talk. Sir, when we get back to civilization, there's going to be an inquiry. Multiple inquiries. FBI, CIA, Army CID. They're going to want to know everything that happened here. Every decision you made, every shot you fired. Jacob met his gaze steadily. I understand, sir. Do you? Because what you did tonight, assaulting an American military facility, killing American soldiers, even traitors, using military equipment for an unauthorized mission. The brass could crucify you for this. Court-martial, prison, dishonorable discharge. I know the risks, General. I accepted them when I took this mission. Castellano studied him. Why did you do it? Really, was it for me? For your son? For your country? Jacob thought about that. About the moment Graves had shown him the photograph. About the drive up the mountain. About pulling the trigger on Harrison Blackwood. All of the above, sir, and none of them. I did it because it was the right thing to do, because sometimes you have to break the rules to uphold what the rules are supposed to protect. That's a dangerous philosophy, Captain. Yes, sir, it is. Castellano smiled slightly. Good answer, because that's exactly what I'm going to tell the investigators. That you acted with courage and initiative in impossible circumstances. That you saved my life and exposed a traitor network that threatened national security. That you're a hero. I'm not a hero, sir. I'm just a father who wanted justice for his son. You can be both. Castellano looked around at the exhausted men. These soldiers followed you into hell tonight. They trusted you to bring them home. That's leadership, Jacob. That's what the Army needs, what the country needs. Before Jacob could respond, Johnson's voice cut through from the perimeter. Movement, southwest, multiple contacts. Jacob was up and moving instantly, Torres right behind him. They reached Johnson's position in seconds. The staff sergeant was crouched behind a boulder, his rifle trained on the forest below. Talk to me, Ray. Heard voices, Russian accents. At least 6 men, maybe more. They're sweeping the area, professional, military. Jacob felt his stomach drop. Blackwood's last words came back to him. The Russians know. They'll be coming. Of course they would. The conspiracy hadn't been just American traitors selling secrets. It had been a coordinated intelligence operation with Soviet handlers. And now those handlers were here to clean up the mess, to eliminate witnesses, to recover their asset before he could talk. Everyone up, Jacob ordered quietly. We're moving. Now. Captain, we just stopped, one of the men protested. And now we're starting again. Russian special forces are hunting us. We stay here. We die here. Move. The column formed up quickly despite the exhaustion. 30 minutes of rest wasn't enough. Would never be enough. But it was what they had. Jacob took point again, leading them north, away from the Russian sweep. They moved as quietly as possible through the forest. But tired men make noise. Equipment rattles. Branches snap. Within 10 minutes, Jacob heard shouts behind them. The Russians had picked up their trail. Double time, Jacob ordered. We're not going to out-sneak them. We're going to outrun them. They ran, or tried to. It was more like a controlled stumble, men helping each other over obstacles. Someone always at the rear making sure nobody fell behind. Morrison was struggling badly now. Johnson took his rifle and pack, redistributing the weight. The Russians were gaining. Jacob could hear them closing the distance. Professional soldiers who weren't exhausted, who hadn't just fought 2 battles, who had fresh legs and clear heads and all the advantages. The logging road was still 8 miles away. They'd never make it. Jacob's mind raced through options. They could make a stand here, fight until the ammunition ran out, die like soldiers. But that meant General Castellano would be captured. All the intelligence he carried would be lost. David's death would mean nothing. Not acceptable. Torres, Jacob said, take the general and 3 men. Best runners we've got. Head straight for that logging road. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get him to safety. Torres looked at him with horror. Captain, no, we're not splitting up. That's an order, Sergeant. Get the general out. That's the mission. What about you? I'm staying with the others. We'll slow down the Russians. Buy you time. That's suicide. Maybe. But it's also the only play we've got. Eddie, David died for this. I'm not letting his death be for nothing. Get the general out. Make sure the world knows what happened here. Make sure those traitors face justice. That's what matters. Torres stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, tears in his eyes. Yes, sir, it's been an honor serving with you, Captain. The honor was mine, Eddie. They chose their runners quickly. Morrison, despite his exhaustion, volunteered immediately. Johnson took another slot. A corporal named Davies made the 4th. Torres would lead them. General Castellano started to protest. Captain, I can't let you do this. With respect, sir, you don't have a choice. Your life matters more than mine. The intelligence you carry could save thousands of American soldiers. My job is to make sure you live to deliver it. Now go. Castellano stood straight, raised his hand in a salute. Jacob returned it. I won't forget this, son, any of this. Tell them about David, sir. Tell them he was a good soldier. I'll tell them he was the best of us. Torres' group disappeared into the forest, moving fast. Jacob watched them go, then turned to the 6 men remaining with him. Young faces, scared faces, but determined. All right, Jacob said, here's what we're going to do. The Russians want to fight, we'll give them one, but we do it smart. Hit and fade, slow them down, make every shot count. And if any of you get a chance to break away and run, you take it. No arguments. Understand? The men nodded. They spread out in a defensive line across the trail, taking positions behind trees and rocks. Jacob checked his ammunition. 3 magazines left for his M14. Maybe 90 rounds total. Not much, but enough. The Russians came 5 minutes later. Jacob saw them through the trees. 12 men. Professional operators in civilian clothes carrying AK-47s. They moved with the confidence of soldiers who'd done this 100 times before. Jacob let them get close. 50 meters. 40. 30. Fire! The forest erupted. 6 American rifles firing as one. 3 Russians went down in the first volley. The rest dove for cover, returning fire. The sound was deafening. Bullets snapped through the air, shredding bark and pine needles. Fall back, Jacob ordered. 50 meters, go! His men retreated in pairs, one covering while the other moved. Textbook tactics, the kind of discipline that came from training and experience. They reached a 2nd position and opened fire again, driving the Russians back. But the enemy was adapting, spreading out, flanking, using their superior numbers to surround the smaller American force. Captain! One of the men, a private named Chen, was hit. Shoulder wound, not fatal but bad enough. He couldn't hold his rifle steady. Davies, help him, Jacob ordered. Everyone else, prepare to move again. They leapfrogged back another 50 meters, then another, buying time with bullets and blood. But the cost was mounting. Chen was down. Another man, Kowalski, took a round through the leg. The Russians were relentless, disciplined. They'd done this before, hunted men through mountains, eliminated witnesses. Jacob was down to his last magazine when he heard it. The distant thunder of rotors, helicopters, coming from the north. For a moment, his heart leapt. Extraction? Had Torres reached the logging road already? Called in support? Then he saw them crest the ridgeline. Not American helicopters, Russian, Mi-8 transport choppers. Two of them, carrying reinforcements. "Contact air!" someone shouted. This was it. The end. No way to fight helicopters with rifles. No way to escape with wounded men. The mathematics of combat had finally caught up with them. Jacob looked at his remaining soldiers. 5 men, all bleeding, all out of options. They'd done everything right. Fought with courage, held nothing back, and it hadn't been enough. But they'd bought Torres time, bought the general time. That would have to be sufficient. "All right," Jacob said. "We make our stand here. No retreat, no surrender. We hold until they overwhelm us, and we take as many of these bastards with us as we can." The men nodded. No complaints, no fear, just acceptance. This was what soldiers did. They stood in the breach. They held the line. They protected what mattered even when it cost them everything. Jacob thought of David, hoped his son was watching, hoped he was proud. Then the helicopters opened up with machine guns, and the world became fire. Jacob dove behind a fallen tree as bullets chewed up the ground. The volume of fire was incredible, overwhelming. The Russians weren't taking chances anymore. They were going to kill everyone in this forest and sort through the bodies later. One of Jacob's men, the youngest, a kid named Peters, stood up to return fire. The machine gun caught him in the chest. He was dead before he hit the ground. 4 left. Jacob fired at the helicopters, knowing it was futile. The rounds sparked off the armor plating. Might as well have been throwing rocks. Then, over the roar of the Russian choppers, Jacob heard different engines, different rotors. He looked up. American helicopters. UH-1 Hueys. 4 of them. Coming in fast and low, and hanging from the side doors were door gunners with M60 machine guns. The cavalry had arrived. The American choppers opened fire on the Russian Mi-8s. Tracer rounds arced through the sky. One of the Russian helicopters took hits, smoke pouring from its engine. It peeled away, struggling to maintain altitude. The second Russian chopper broke off the attack, turning to engage the Hueys. On the ground, the Russian soldiers suddenly found themselves trapped. The Americans they'd been hunting now had air support. The hunters became the hunted. Jacob didn't waste the opportunity. "Hit them! Hit them now!" His 4 remaining men opened fire. Caught between aerial and ground assault, the Russian force broke. Some tried to run, some tried to fight, most died. The gunfight lasted less than 2 minutes. When it was over, 9 Russian soldiers lay dead on the forest floor. The rest had scattered into the woods. One of the Hueys landed in a small clearing 30 meters away. The side door flew open and Colonel Martin Graves jumped out, accompanied by 6 heavily armed CIA operators. Graves ran to Jacob's position, his usual cold expression replaced by something almost like concern. "Captain Mitchell, are you hit?" Jacob looked down at himself. Blood covered his uniform, but he wasn't sure how much was his. "I'm functional. How did you find us?" Sergeant Torres reached the logging road. "Called in your position. We had a quick reaction force standing by at Edwards Air Force Base. Soon as we got the word, we scrambled everything we had." Graves looked at the carnage around them. "Where's General Castellano?" "Safe. Torres is bringing him out." Graves nodded. "Good man, both of you." He keyed his radio. "All units, this is Overwatch. Primary objective secured. Secondary objective in transit. Begin extraction operations." The other helicopters were landing now. Medics jumped out, racing to treat the wounded. CIA operators spread out, securing the perimeter. In minutes, the chaotic battlefield became an organized extraction site. Jacob watched them work, feeling disconnected, like he was observing from a great distance. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving him hollow and shaking. "Captain," Graves was beside him again, "I need you to listen carefully. What happened here tonight, the assault on Camp Granite, the engagement with Russian forces on American soil, this is going to create a shitstorm like you cannot imagine. Every intelligence agency, every branch of the military, congressional committees, they're all going to want answers." "I understand." "Do you? Because the official story is going to be very different from what actually happened. Officially, there was no mission, no assault, no conspiracy. General Castellano was never kidnapped. He was undercover, investigating suspected traitors. You were his security detail. Everything that happened was part of an authorized counterintelligence operation. Jacob looked at him. You're going to bury the truth. I'm going to protect national security. If word gets out that we had a traitor network this deep, this organized, it'll shake faith in the entire military command structure. Our allies will question whether they can trust us. Our enemies will exploit it. So yes, we're going to classify everything, seal the records, and ensure that everyone involved understands the importance of operational security. You mean keep our mouths shut? I mean serve your country one more time by protecting the secrets that need protecting. Graves's voice softened slightly. I know what you've been through tonight, Captain. I know what you lost. Your friend, your son, your faith in the system. But I'm asking you to trust that we're doing the right thing. Jacob thought about David, about Harrison Blackwood, about all the men who died tonight because of secrets and lies and conspiracies. What about the other traitors, the ones Castellano identified? They'll be handled, quietly, efficiently. Most will be forced to retire. Some will be prosecuted in closed tribunals. But it'll all happen behind locked doors. The public will never know. That's not justice. No, it's not. But it's what's necessary. Graves paused. For what it's worth, Captain, your son died a hero. He discovered a threat to national security and refused to stand down even when it cost him his life. That matters. That means something. Does it? Jacob's voice was bitter. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like he died for nothing. The conspirators get to slink away in the shadows. The truth gets buried, and the official record will say he died in a training accident. The official record has to say that. But you'll know the truth. General Castellano knows. The president knows. History will know, eventually, when the records are declassified in 50 years. David's sacrifice will be remembered. 50 years I'll be dead. Probably. But your son's name will live on. That's more than most soldiers get. A medic approached. Sir, we need to check you out. Jacob waved him off. I'm fine. Check the others first. Captain, you're bleeding. Jacob looked down. The medic was right. Blood was seeping through his uniform in several places. Shrapnel wounds, probably, or bullet grazes. He hadn't felt them in the heat of combat. Now they were starting to register. Sharp pains, burning sensations. All right, make it quick. The medic led him to one of the helicopters where a field hospital was being set up. As they worked on him, cleaning wounds and applying bandages, Jacob watched the operation continue around him. More helicopters arrived, more soldiers. The forest was becoming a staging ground. Torres appeared 30 minutes later, leading General Castellano and the three runners. All of them were exhausted but alive. When Torres saw Jacob, his face split into a huge grin. Captain, you magnificent bastard, I thought you were dead. Takes more than a few Russians to kill me, Eddie. Torres grabbed him in a bear hug, ignoring protocol and rank. Jacob hugged him back, feeling emotion well up for the first time since Blackwood died. These men, his men, they'd followed him into hell and come back out the other side. General Castellano approached, moving slowly but under his own power. He extended his hand. Jacob shook it. Captain Mitchell, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, sir. I was just doing my job. You went far beyond your job. You and your men saved my life. More than that, you exposed a conspiracy that threatened everything we built. The president will want to meet you, to thank you personally. Jacob shook his head. With respect, sir, I don't want to meet the president. I don't want medals or commendations or public recognition. I just want to go home. Castellano studied him. To retire, like you were planning before all this? I don't know anymore. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in, it all feels like lies now. I understand, but consider this. What you did tonight, the courage you showed, the leadership, the refusal to quit even when everything seemed lost. That's not a lie, that's real. That's what makes you who you are. And the Army needs men like you. Men who will do what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Before Jacob could respond, one of the CIA operators called out, General Castellano, Colonel Graves needs you for debriefing. Castellano nodded. He looked at Jacob one more time. Think about what I said, son. Your story isn't over yet. Then he was gone, swept up in the machinery of intelligence and national security. Jacob watched him go, feeling the weight of the past 48 hours finally settle on his shoulders. Torres sat down beside him. So, what now, Captain? Now we go home, face whatever music the brass wants to play, and try to figure out how to live with everything that happened. You think Graves is right about keeping it all secret? Jacob thought about that, about David, about Blackwood, about all the young men who died tonight whose families would never know the truth. I think Graves is doing what he thinks he has to do, whether he's right or wrong. That's above my pay grade. And David, his death just gets swept under the rug? No. Jacob's voice was firm. David's death meant something. It exposed traitors. It led to this mission. It probably saved lives we'll never know about. That's not nothing, Eddie. That's something to build on. Torres nodded slowly. Guess you're right. Still feels wrong, though. A lot of things feel wrong. We live with it anyway. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher. The forest around them was peaceful now. Birds singing, wind in the trees. No sign of the violence that had stained this ground just hours before. Nature didn't care about human conflicts. It just kept going, season after season, year after year. Maybe that was the lesson. Keep going, keep fighting, keep standing up for what mattered, even when the cost was high. One of the Hueys lifted off, carrying wounded soldiers back to proper medical care. Jacob watched it go, thinking about the men who hadn't made it. Lieutenant Webb and his crew, Private Peters, the others, good soldiers who'd followed orders and paid the ultimate price. Captain, Morrison approached, his young face serious. I just wanted to say, thank you for everything. You saved my life tonight, probably saved all our lives. Jacob looked at the kid, 20 years old, same age David had been. You saved yourself, Private. You stood when you could have run. You fought when you could have surrendered. That's all you. Still, I wanted you to know. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you just say the word. I'll remember that. Thank you, Morrison. The private saluted and walked away. Torres watched him go. He's right, you know. Every man here would follow you into hell again tomorrow if you asked. Let's hope I don't have to ask. But if you did, we'd go. That's what you built tonight, Captain. Not just a successful mission. You built a brotherhood, something that'll last longer than any of us. Jacob thought about that, brotherhood. He'd had that with Harrison Blackwood once, had trusted him absolutely, and that trust had been betrayed in the worst possible way. But maybe that was the risk you took. Maybe trust was always a gamble. You gave it knowing it might be broken. You built connections knowing they might be severed. But you did it anyway because the alternative was living alone. Isolated, safe but empty. David had trusted, had believed in honor and duty and doing the right thing, and it had gotten him killed. But it had also meant something, had stood for something, had inspired others. Maybe that was enough. Eddie, Jacob said, you ever think about what comes after? After what? After all this, after the army, after the missions and the wars and the fighting. What do we do then? Torres considered. I figure we do what soldiers have always done. We find the next fight, the next mission. We keep serving because that's who we are. That's what we know. And if there's no more fights, no more missions, then we teach. We pass it on to the next generation. Make sure they know what we learn, so they don't have to make the same mistakes. Jacob thought about the classroom full of young officers back at Fort Irwin, the ones who'd learn from his experience, who'd carry forward the lessons bought with blood and sacrifice. Maybe you're right, he said. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. Teach, train, make sure David's death means something by preventing others. Sounds like a mission to me, Captain. Yeah, it does. The evacuation continued through the morning. By noon, every soldier had been extracted. The bodies of the fallen were recovered with full military honors. The Russian corpses were photographed, documented, and quietly disposed of. Evidence of the conspiracy was cataloged and classified. By evening, Camp Granite was empty again. Just another abandoned military facility in the mountains. The forest would reclaim it in time. The snow would bury it, and future hikers might wonder what had happened there, never knowing the truth. Jacob Mitchell flew back to Fort Irwin in a Huey, watching the Sierra Nevada fall away beneath him. Somewhere in those mountains, his son's killers had faced justice. Somewhere in that wilderness, a conspiracy had been exposed. Somewhere in the rocks and trees and snow, Captain Jacob Mitchell had found his purpose again. It wasn't the purpose he'd wanted. It wasn't the ending he'd hoped for. But it was real. And it was his. 2 weeks later, Jacob stood in front of a classroom at Fort Irwin. 40 young officers looked back at him, eager and attentive, fresh out of West Point, full of idealism and courage and the belief that they could change the world. just like David had been. Gentlemen, Jacob began, welcome to Advanced Armored Tactics. Over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to teach you everything I know about commanding tanks in combat. But more than that, I'm going to teach you about leadership, about integrity, about the kind of courage that doesn't come from a battlefield, but from making the right choice even when nobody's watching. He paused, looking at each face. Some of you will go on to command tanks in combat. Some will lead men in situations where the stakes are life and death. And when that moment comes, when you're tired and scared and everything seems hopeless, I want you to remember three words. Three words that define what it means to be an American soldier. He wrote on the blackboard behind him in large letters, "No one left behind." That's our creed. That's our promise to each other, to our nation, to everyone who depends on us. We don't abandon our people. We don't give up. We don't quit. No matter how hard it gets, no matter what it costs, we bring everyone home. He thought of David, of Torres, of all the men who'd followed him up that mountain and back again. My son believed that. He lived it, and he died for it. And I'm standing here today to make sure you understand what it really means. Not just words on a poster, but a commitment, a way of life, a standard we hold ourselves to even when nobody else is watching. One of the young officers raised his hand. Sir, what if keeping that promise cost your own life? Jacob smiled slightly. Then you pay that price. Because that's what soldiers do. We stand in the gap. We hold the line. We protect what matters even when it costs us everything. That's not optional. That's not negotiable. That's who we are. He spent the next 3 hours teaching them about armor tactics, about movement and fire and maneuver, about the technical aspects of commanding a tank in combat. But underlying every lesson was the deeper truth he'd learned on that mountain. That honor mattered. That sacrifice mattered. That standing up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when nobody would ever know, that mattered most of all. When the class ended, the young officers filed out, talking excitedly among themselves. But one remained behind, a lieutenant with sharp eyes and an earnest expression. Captain Mitchell, I just wanted to say, my brother served with your son, David Mitchell. He told me about him, about how good he was, how much everyone respected him. Jacob felt his throat tighten. Your brother knew David? Yes, sir. He was there when it happened, the accident. It wasn't an accident. The words came out before Jacob could stop them. The lieutenant looked confused. Sir? Jacob took a breath. He'd promised Graves he'd keep the secret, that he'd let the official story stand. But looking at this young officer, this kid who'd known David, he couldn't maintain the lie. Your brother was right about David. He was good, he was honorable, and he died protecting this country from enemies within. Not in a training accident. That's classified. You can't repeat it. But I wanted you to know, David Mitchell was a hero. The lieutenant stood straighter. Thank you for telling me, sir. I'll keep it to myself, but thank you. After he left, Jacob sat alone in the empty classroom. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. Somewhere outside, tanks were running exercises. The sounds of military life continued, constant and familiar. Jacob pulled out the photograph he carried everywhere now. David in his lieutenant's uniform, smiling that smile that was so much like his mother's, full of hope and promise and belief in a better tomorrow. I'm trying, son, Jacob said softly to the picture. I'm trying to make it mean something, to honor what you stood for. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm trying. The photograph didn't answer, but Jacob felt in some deep place he couldn't explain that David knew, that David understood, that David was proud. And that would have to be enough. Captain Jacob Mitchell put the photograph back in his pocket, stood up, and walked out into the California sunshine. He had another class in an hour, more young officers to train, more lessons to teach, more chances to make a difference. The war might be over. The mission might be complete, but the fight continued. Every day, every lesson, every young soldier he helped prepare for the challenges ahead. That was his mission now, his purpose, his way of honoring David's sacrifice. No one left behind, not the fallen, not the future, not the truth. He'd keep teaching, keep fighting, keep standing for what mattered, until the day he couldn't stand anymore. And even then, someone else would pick up the banner, would carry forward the lessons, would remember the sacrifice. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. One generation passing the torch to the next. One soldier standing for another. One life given so that others might live free. That was the legacy. That was the purpose. That was what David had died for. And Jacob Mitchell would spend the rest of his life making sure nobody forgot it. The sun climbed higher over Fort Irwin. Tanks rumbled across the desert. Young soldiers trained and laughed and prepared for wars they couldn't yet imagine. And in a classroom where sunlight painted shadows on empty desks, 3 words remained on the blackboard. No one left behind. A promise, a creed, a way of life. Forever. The end.